The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. What can I really say about this game that hasn't already been said? Released in the US on November 23, 1998 for the N64, Ocarina of Time was critically acclaimed all over the world and is still to this day considered as one of the greatest video games ever made. While I certainly don't agree with that statement, no one can deny the massive influence this game left on the future of the Zelda series, as well as gaming in general. But is it deserved? Well, that's why I'm here. To explore that influence and look at the game critically for what it really is. This is an in-depth review, so I'm holding nothing back here. If you haven't played this yet and don't wish to be spoiled on story, gameplay, or anything else, then you're better off stopping this video now. For everyone else, sit back and put your feet up. My friends, I'm ScourgeBladeZelda, and welcome to the Review Arena, where I fight against the good, the bad, the ugly, and just plain rad of gaming. Today we face off against the magnum opus of the Zelda franchise, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Heaven or Hell. Let's rock! Let's start things off by going over the game's development. Believe it or not, Ocarina of Time was originally planned as a 3D remake of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link of all things for the Super Famicom, but it never came to be due to the limitations of the console. The new game, codenamed Zelda 64 at the time, was first shown off at Space World 1996 and was originally developed for the N64 disk drive. It was supposed to take full advantage of the add-on's capabilities like its higher quality images, first-person gameplay, eternal clock, and even internet connection, which was very ambitious for the time. It was also structured similarly to Super Mario 64, with Ganon's castle as the only setting, and various different rooms in the castle serving as the dungeons. It used the same graphics engine, as well as similar gameplay features like using the C buttons to move the camera instead of items like in the final game. And there was even a manual jump button, as shown here. However, the N64 disk drive, as a lot of you know by now, was a complete failure, so Nintendo chose to redevelop it for a cartridge release. And even when it was finally finished and released, it still went through a couple updates afterwards. More on that later. So yeah, this game's development was all over the place, to put it lightly. But now let's go to the game that we actually got, starting with the story. If you're a fan of gaming and somehow don't know a single thing about Ocarina of Time's story, then I question what rock you've been living under. That being said, I'm spoiling this plot rotten, so just a heads up. The story of the game is actually pretty straightforward. It starts off in the mystical Kokiri Forest, with the player having a prosthetic dream of future events. A nice bit of foreshadowing there. You can technically call this boy whatever you want, but canonically, his name is Link, symbolizing that he's the link between the player and the game. He's considered the lens in which the player sees everything through, which is pretty clever if I do say so myself. In the depths of Kokiri Forest, its guardian, the Great Deku Tree, summons a fairy by the name of Navi, for he has been cursed by an unknown force. He instructs Navi to seek out the boy without a fairy and bring that boy to him. That boy obviously being Link. Link successfully defeats the monsters inside the Deku Tree, but learns his efforts were in vain, as the Deku Tree was already doomed from the start. With his dying breath, he gives Link a spiritual stone called the Kokiri's Emerald, the treasure that the evil force who cursed him wanted, and tells Link to take his very first step out of the forest and journey to Hyrule Castle in search of Princess Zelda. He also tells Link a story about the three goddesses who created the world, Din, Nehru, and Furore, as well as the Triforce, before sending him on his way. Upon sneaking into the castle like a boss, Link meets Princess Zelda, who picks up where the Deku Tree left off. She tells Link about the Sacred Realm, where the Triforce is located. In order to get into the Sacred Realm, however, one needs the three spiritual stones, as well as the Ocarina of Time, and travel to the Temple of Time to open the Door of Time and pull out the Master Sword from the Pedestal of Time. Still with me? Good, because there's more. She too has also suffered from the same prosthetic dreams that Link suffered in the beginning, but also senses that ruin will soon come to Hyrule, but her father doesn't believe her. She also explains that Ganondorf, the king of the Gerudos, is the cause of this ruin, and swears false loyalty to the king in order to get closer to the Sacred Realm. So to combat this, Link must collect the other 2 spiritual stones while she guards the Ocarina of Time to keep Ganondorf away from the Triforce. It goes about as well as you'd expect. After getting an utterly pointless letter just to get past one guard, as well as learning the most important song in the game in Zelda's Lullaby, Link is escorted out of the castle by Zelda's attendant, Impa, who is only the start of the N64's boner-killing women meme. Oh, God. Don't worry, Impa, you'll see better days. She points Link towards Death Mountain, home of the rock-eating Gorons, and then just poofs away. Seriously, she does almost nothing else in the entire game, which is very off-putting to me. She's Zelda's right-hand woman, who's in on her plan, and yet she just leaves this important world-saving task to a 9-year-old child they literally just met. It's a very minor detail, but it bugs me nonetheless. After this, the overarching story just kind of pauses until you get the other 2 spiritual stones. Darunia, the chief of the Gorons, is worried for his tribe since they're going hungry and decides to call Link a brother when he inevitably saves them from the monsters in Dodongo's cavern. Then he rewards Link with the 2nd spiritual stone, the Goron's Ruby. Princess Ruto of the Zoras is just your typical rebellious brat looking for her possession that was swallowed by Lord Jabu Jabu, but falls in love and decides to give you the 3rd spiritual stone, the Zora Sapphire, as thanks for saving her. She also calls Link her fiancé later in the game due to the stone being the Zora's equivalent to an engagement ring. Yeah, I'm just gonna throw that out there. It's exactly as weird as it sounds. Anyway, with all 3 spiritual stones in hand, Link returns to Hyrule Castle. But he's too late, as it's already engulfed in flames with Zelda fleeing from Ganondorf on horseback. Before she leaves, however, she flings the Ocarina of Time towards Link so he can enter the Sacred Realm. After a brief encounter with Ganondorf, which is really nothing but him blasting Link and running off, Link grabs the Ocarina of Time and enters the Sacred Realm by drawing the Master Sword. He soon finds out, however, that Ganondorf tailed him and reveals that this was his plan all along, yada yada yada. Pretty standard fare. Link wakes up in the Sacred Realm, suddenly all grown up, and meets Rauru, a sage of the Sacred Realm. In an information dump that lasts for fucking ever, he tells Link that when he pulled the Master Sword from its pedestal, he was deemed too young to become the hero, and was placed into a magical slumber for 7 long years. And during those 7 years, Ganondorf was able to obtain the Triforce of Power and conquer the world, now ruling it with an iron fist. Now, this is where my first big problem with the story comes up. This is a terrible way to justify a time skip. Being too young to wield the Master Sword makes no sense, especially in the context of the rest of the series. Now, of course, there are theories out there that try to explain this, but they're just that, theories. And this would be fine if it became a running trend in future games, but no, that isn't the case for the rest of the series. Past games didn't really do this either. This is the only game where this plot point is even a thing. For example, in The Wind Waker, Link is around 12 years old, and yet he's able to wield the Master Sword perfectly fine. So, what gives? I know I shouldn't be comparing this game's plot choices to a game that came afterwards, but it's still worthy of note. I never knew why this was a thing, and I still don't know even to this day. It's just unnecessary. Anyway, my confusion about the choices of the plot aside, after this information dump, Rauru gives Link the Light Medallion and tells him to find the other 5 sages and awaken them in order to gain access to Ganon's tower and take him down for good. Link then meets Sheik, a ninja of the Sheikah, who reveals the location of each sage's prison, all of them being in the same places you've currently been except for one. Difference is, these areas are quite particularly worse off from when you last visited them. Unfortunately, story progression just kind of halts again after the first sage is saved, and the new Deku Tree Sprout, which looks hilarious by the way, tells Link that he's actually not a Kokiri, but a Hylian, who was brought to this forest by his dying mother in an attempt to save him from certain death. Which is a nice twist, but it doesn't really go anywhere past that, and it feels like a missed opportunity. Nothing else really happens story-wise except seeing Kakariko Village in flames, Link and Sheik being attacked by something they can't even see and humorously manhandle Sheik, but other than that, nothing. Speaking of Sheik, he also does nothing important. Literally all he does is appear before a dungeon, teaches Link a song allowing him to warp back to the area at any time, spouts some cryptic BS about time, as if we haven't had enough of that already, and then just leaves to spend the rest of the game off-screen until the big plot twist where he reveals to be Princess Zelda in disguise. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that last part out loud? Yeah, I know I'm jumping the gun on that, but seriously, who doesn't know this twist by now? You could say it's legendary.
You suck!
I'll see myself out now. There's really nothing to go over beforehand story-wise, so let's just skip ahead here. The only thing worth mentioning are the sages, who are revealed to be Link's childhood friend Saria, Darunia, Ruto, Impa, and a Gerudo woman by the name of Naburu, who you meet in the Spirit Temple. After revealing herself and giving Link the light arrows, Zelda is immediately kidnapped by Ganondorf in a fashion that surprises absolutely no one, and challenges Link to meet him at his tower so he can settle this like men, and obtain the 2 Triforce pieces of wisdom and courage that he couldn't get 7 years ago, which reside in Zelda and Link respectively. Upon doing so, Ganondorf goes down, but with the last of his strength attempts to bring the tower down along with them. Link and Zelda manage to escape just in time as the tower crumbles into a pile of rubble. Ganondorf somehow survived this, however, and uses the Triforce of Power to transform into his true form, Ganon, creating a final battle that can only be described as epic. After Ganon is defeated, Link stabs him in the face and Zelda seals him away, ending Ocarina of Time. Afterwards, Zelda explains it was her fault that Ganondorf was able to cause all this trouble, and sends Link back in time to relive his childhood, undoing Link's whole adventure in the process. Well, damn! That's a pretty bittersweet ending if you ask me. However, it's widely speculated that after this, Link returns to the castle and tells Zelda about what happens in the future, so Ganondorf could be dealt with before having the chance to do anything. And I agree, it makes sense considering the game ends with Link meeting Zelda in the castle garden once again. The story overall, while it has a few holes and it probably sounded like I was mocking it to the high heavens, it's pretty decent all things considered. It's simple, it doesn't get too full of itself, and leaves room to be improved on by other games in the series. Although it could do with a little less of the cryptic time philosophy bullshit, but I'm getting off track here. It's also the game that created the convoluted timeline split, so take that how you will. My biggest problem with this story, however, comes from Link himself. The game's story centers completely around him, and it falls flat due to Link being a stone-faced idiot for the entire game. He barely reacts to anything, and when he's trying to be the avatar in which the player views the game, this Link does a very poor job at making the story feel impactful. It just makes me not care. I've seen FPSs that do this better, even though you never actually see the character's face. Despite this, on its own merits, it's alright. Not great, but it gets the job done. Gameplay-wise, Ocarina of Time controls quite smoothly despite its age, but there are still some aspects about it that might put off new players. First of all, Link is not able to jump by pressing a button. This isn't a platformer after all, only the most basic of platforming is present here. So how do you cross gaps at all? Simple. When the player runs off of a ledge with a bit of momentum, Link will jump automatically. Additionally, a well-timed roll can boost Link's jump slightly as well. Fans of platforming are the ones I could see having the most trouble adjusting to this, but trust me, it isn't as bad as it sounds. That being said, however, Link isn't Mario. He isn't able to move in midair after he jumps. So once you're off the ground, you're committed to that jump until you hit the floor. You can move forward or backward slightly to increase or decrease your momentum, but that's about it. It's like the Belmonts from the Castlevania series in that way. But unlike Castlevania, the areas around Link are built with this limitation in mind, so it never gets in the way of the gameplay. Every missed jump feels like the fault of the player. Furthermore, the camera is also handled differently. Instead of using the C buttons to control which direction the camera is, it's much more auto this time around. For example, when jumping, the camera faces slightly downwards so the player can get a glimpse of where they're landing, which helps a lot in certain situations later on in the game. although there have been those times where the camera has decided to be difficult and not allow me to see what I want. But that doesn't happen too often, so don't worry too much. That doesn't mean the camera is completely uncontrollable, though. If the camera isn't facing the way you want it, you can press the Z button to snap the camera back to the direction Link is currently facing, which I take advantage of so much it's like second nature to me, to the point where I hardly realize I'm even doing it anymore. By pressing Z near an enemy, you can Z-target them, and the camera focuses on the enemy and moves according to that enemy, as well as Link's position. While targeting an enemy, you can press the A button to execute a jump attack, which doesn't feel as clean or as accurate as it should, so it's hard to use, but when mastered, it does a lot of damage. While the targeting system is brilliant for the most part, it's still rough around the edges. For instance, I've had times where the game won't let me target at all if I'm not in a certain position for my opponent. In addition, the game also tends to not let me cancel targeting when there are multiple enemies around me, as it just changes targets back and forth, leaving me wide open to punishment. That one in particular is frustrating, and has led me to take a lot of unfair damage when I don't really want to fight anything. It's even caused me to die a few times. The B button is locked to the sword, but the 3 C buttons can be used to equip any 3 items in your inventory for instant use, which is pretty handy. Keeping you from needing to pause to switch items is often like in the 2D games, but the items are somewhat lacking in combat. Most of the enemies in-game are better off being killed with the sword. However, I do have one problem that comes with this, and that's the hitbox on Link's sword. I've noted countless times where I've swung my sword at an enemy, and the game decides that I missed, despite being right next to what I was attacking. The hurtbox on certain enemies can also be pretty questionable at times, such as likes. Look at this. My sword just keeps bouncing off of it like its flesh is made of fucking metal. It's for this very reason that I actually find the smaller enemies like Keese tougher to fight than the bigger things like Stalfos, who only require good timing to get around their defenses. These are mostly minor complaints though, so even though it's far from perfect, the game plays great, especially for the developer's first attempt at 3D gameplay for a Zelda title. But one of the biggest problems that people bring up when it comes to negatives in the gameplay is Navi. You know what I'm talking about, the "hey, look, listen" memes. People really hate Navi for this reason, saying she's so annoying because of always telling the player pointless things that are obvious, like pressing A to open a door. While I agree with this notion in some instances, most of the time I don't find her that bad. The only time I find Navi a bit annoying is when I'm in Hyrule Field and she tells me to make my way to my next destination, when I'm already in the middle of doing so. If anything, I kind of like Navi, believe it or not. Yeah, I said it. I like Navi. And allow me to explain why. When I was making my way through the graveyard after the cutscene in Kakariko Village, I was trying to remember how to get up the cliff to get into the Shadow Temple. I was there for about 20 minutes completely stumped, when it was Navi who reminded me that I can't get up there normally, I have to play the Nocturne of Shadow to get up there. You see, around every half hour or so, Navi will call and remind you of what you're supposed to be doing, and by doing so, she helped me out. On my own, I probably would have taken a lot longer to remember that because of how terrible my memory is. I think that's definitely worthy of note. Navi isn't that bad, guys. She's there for a reason. One more thing that I'd like to bring up, but that's not as noticeable until replaying the game, is the text speed, which is so slow it makes even the most simple cutscenes feel like an eternity, and there's no way to speed it up. It really sucks at the beginning of the game, since you'll be spending a good amount of game time just trying to mash through the text. Now finally, with all that out of the way, let's get on to the real meat of the game. The dungeons. The first dungeon is inside the Great Deku Tree. Getting to this dungeon can be a bit annoying and tedious due to needing to grind for money early on for a shield to get past resident Kokiri jackass Mito over here, but thankfully there are quite a few hidden places around Kokiri Village to get money, so it's not that bad. The dungeon itself is a great introduction to the extra dimension caused by a 3D space. It's shaped vertically, and as such requires puzzle solving to be done vertically as well, such as climbing up a bunch of vines, aiming up in first person to shoot Skulltulas with the slingshot, diving underwater to hit a switch, and falling down from high up to break the spiderweb on the ground blocking your path to the basement. It's simple, but it works well. The dungeon boss, Goma, is absolutely no threat to you whatsoever, and goes down fairly quickly. It can even be destroyed in one round if you know what you're doing. Overall, this dungeon is pretty easy, but it's a great start to ease the player into the game. After obtaining the Kokiri Emerald, the world truly opens up to explore. However, you gotta truck through Hyrule Field first, and it's about as needlessly spacious as they come. Seriously, there's nothing to do in this overworld except to go to Lon Lon Ranch. The rest of Hyrule Field seems to serve as padding and pretty much nothing else. It's so empty and takes such a long time to go through that it feels like it's only there to make the world feel big. But what's the point of having a gigantic overworld if there's literally nothing to do but fight a few peahats and stall children? And it doesn't get much better until you get Epona as an adult, and even then, it's still a pain in the neck to travel through. I can even go as far as to say a lot of the game's biggest problems can be traced back to the overworld. And I don't just mean how empty it is. First of all, it introduces the annoyance known as Kapora Gabora. Ugh. During the child portion of the game, this stupid owl will constantly interrupt your progress to spout crap you either already know or are painfully obvious. Say what you want about Navi. Her noises may be obnoxious, but at least she doesn't stop your progress until you choose to answer her yourself. The owl, however, just interrupts you out of nowhere and takes a lot longer to scroll through his text. He even asks if you want to hear it again, and since you're likely to be speeding through his text as fast as possible, you'll probably end up clicking yes at least once, wasting even more time. This happens a lot during the child portion, and you can't skip him. God, go away, you stupid bird! I know what the item subscreen is! Another thing that bugs me about the overworld is the day and night system. Now, on the surface, this is pretty cool. As time passes in the overworld, it changes from night to day and vice versa, so some things in the game can only be accessed at certain times. But for the most part, daytime is what you want, and when you first get out of Kokiri Forest, it's always night by the time you get to Hyrule Castletown, which closes its gates at night. As such, you're stuck outside for a while fighting stall children until day comes, which isn't that long to be fair, but this can also happen on the path to the castle, and unlike the field, there's nothing to do but stand there and wait. Fortunately, to be fair, you do get a song later on in the form of the Sun Song, which fixes this problem, but by then, it doesn't really matter all that much unless you plan on doing side quests like the Golden Skulltulas, some of which can only be found at night. There are 100 in total all over the world. I didn't bother looking for them all, but I did get a good chunk of them. Which, admittedly, the Sun Song did help with, so I'll give the game some credit and say better late than never. There's one more problem to mention about the overworld, but I'll get back to that in a bit. Hyrule Castletown is much livelier than previous entries in the series, to say the least, but it's the most noticeable example of the game's use of pre-rendered backgrounds, which all look very dated and blurry. There are other players like inside houses that these are used for, but it's most noticeable here. It's not very pretty to look at all. There's a lot you can do in Castletown, but you can't do most of them by this point unless you picked up a bunch of money from Hyrule Field. Anyway, after going through the easiest stealth section ever and talking to Zelda to get Zelda's lullaby, it's time for Death Mountain and Dodongo's Cavern. Goron City is an interesting place. It almost feels like a fossil digging site with its own race that survives on the rocks around them. I've always liked the Gorons for how welcoming they are to visitors from other races, minus Darunia. It can be a bit of a pain to navigate through though, so just a heads up to those with bad directions like me. But sooner or later, we'll be able to make Darunia dance like a madman. Shake that booty, girl! And you're on to Dodongo's Cavern. This dungeon seems like a huge step up from the Deku Tree due to how many directions there are to go. However, it's not as complicated as it looks. This is actually a pretty linear dungeon, with the other paths containing hidden goodies. The puzzles focus on bombs, which are absolutely everywhere in this place. Bomb flowers, a chest with a bomb bag to carry on you. Hell, some of the enemies even explode when killed. But I think the best part is dropping them in the eyes of the Dodongo statue head to open its mouth in order to proceed. It's very satisfying for some odd reason. Like, you really accomplished something big, even though you only really dropped some bombs in the statue's eyes. I don't know, Zelda games tend to do that to me a lot. This dungeon tends to bore me though at times, since that's all it takes to solve most of these puzzles. Just blow them up. And it gets old fast, despite my earlier statement about the Dodongo statue head. The chain reaction on this staircase is pretty cool though. But other than waiting for the rising platforms in the hub room, there was nothing else wrong with this dungeon. Everything else that went wrong for me was my own fault. Yeah, I didn't have the smoothest run of this temple. I was way too greedy with trying out some of the speedrunning strats without the skill of an actual speedrunner. It was pretty embarrassing to say the least. Anyway, after an incredibly simple boss fight that consists of waiting, throwing bombs, and blocking, King Dodonko sinks into the lava and we get the Goron's Ruby. On to Zora's Domain and Jabu Jabu's Belly. Zora's Domain is probably my favorite area in the game. It's just so beautiful and relaxing to me. The Zoras are a really cool race. The music that plays here is one of the most relaxing pieces in the entire series, and there's even a mini-game that you can do which allows you to dive deeper underwater. I don't know, I just love the water areas in Zelda. Yes, I did just say that. You could just head to the dungeon in a few minutes, but I always feel like taking my time and enjoying the smooth ride towards the next dungeon. It's like taking a trip through the lazy river. It's not exactly fun or eventful, but it's relaxing. Well, except for this part. Yeah, I got nothing for this. It's a thing that exists, that they went out of their way to animate. Why? Who knows? But it's there, and it's just as terrible as it looks. The developers had to have known this, but decided to leave it in anyway as a joke. And if that's indeed the case, then I'd like to meet said person, buy them a drink, break the bottle over their head, buy them another one as an apology, and secretly put laxatives in it. 'Cause this shit is not funny! That aside, let's move on to Jabu Jabu's Belly, which is definitely my favorite of the child dungeons. It definitely feels like you shouldn't be here. You're essentially inside a giant fish that's been acting more than a little odd. As such, everything around you is moving. The walls, the floor, even some things stick out and attack you. I don't fucking know what these things are, and I don't think I want to know. It's pretty unsettling, which is good since you need to cut through these things to move on, and it's gross. But that just adds to what I love about this dungeon. As a result of this, certain parts of Jabu Jabu's insides are closed off, as they should be. They aren't locked for the sake of being locked like most other dungeons in Zelda. You're walking around in a giant creature's insides. And not only do you have to deal with the enemies that have made this place their home, you're also dealing with Jabu Jabu himself and his immune system. I love little touches like this to death, and it makes the puzzles in this one feel all the more real. To top it off, we have Princess Ruto, the proof that the genius folks at Nintendo know what they're doing. Ruto sort of makes this whole dungeon a big escort mission, which sounds terrible on paper, but with a twist. Ruto has no health bar. As such, she can't die. Even if she ends up getting stuck in water, she just magically poofs and respawns at the beginning of the room, which is actually pretty weird since she's a Zora. You'd think she'd be able to swim out of it herself at least. What, is she too pompous and lazy to do it herself? She's a fish. You also don't have to worry about her getting into any shenanigans, because her character suggests that she's too spoiled to follow you around herself. So she just sits there expecting to be picked up and carried throughout the dungeon. Yeah, it sounds kinda stupid, but I wouldn't have it any other way. To quote Matthew Mitosis here, she's less of an annoying AI character that you need to keep alive, and more of a prop that you have to use to get through the dungeon. Which is true, since many NPCs needed to be escorted in other games feel like deadweight. But in Ruto's case, she is actually used as deadweight in some instances. It's actually pretty funny. However, there's one big thing that keeps me from enjoying this dungeon as much as others in the game, and that's the enemies. They're so fucking annoying. They're small, they're everywhere, they're hard to hit, and just not a fun time overall. The mini-boss especially can just go to hell. It may be just me, but it seems like he moves way too fast. I can never seem to reach him because of the boomerang's piss-poor range, and there's nowhere to dodge, so he can just run into you. If you're not fast enough to stun him beforehand, you're taking a hit, which seems pretty unfair if you ask me. I shit you not. I've died on this stupid things much more than any other mini-boss in the entire series. I don't know what it is. Is it because of the game design, or is it just my lack of skill, since I seem to be the only one who has any sort of trouble on this thing? It's still worthy of note, but there may be something I'm missing, so take that one with a grain of salt. Anyway, getting to the end nets you what is possibly my favorite boss in the game, and even one of my favorite bosses in the franchise, Baronade. Yeah, on the surface, it seems like a fight that consists mainly of just throwing the boomerang, but what sets this one apart from the rest is that Baronade switches up his attack patterns, forcing you to do the same. It's simple, but it's a nice change of pace for a Zelda fan like myself, who's always told to just use the dungeon item in the same way over and over to stun the boss in order to whack it with the sword. Yeah, you're both using the same weapons. He's using lightning and you're using the boomerang, but it's still a change that I appreciate. And it makes me wonder why people don't talk about this one more often. Kinda makes me sad. Nevertheless, after this boss falls, the Zora's Sapphire is yours for the taking. Now we move on to the adult portion. And as soon as you leave the Temple of Time, the last problem with the overworld shows its ugly face. After stepping out of the Temple of Time for the first time as an adult, you're greeted by a destroyed castle town with re-deads everywhere. And it's very shocking, since it makes the player automatically compelled to save the land because of how Castletown used to look like. And that's not even mentioning Ganon's tower floating above a pit of lava in the ruins of Hyrule Castle, which is just unsettling on so many levels. It really lets your mind run rampant. Like, what the hell happened during the last 7 years? It sets the mood perfectly. Unfortunately, however, this doesn't last. In contrast to a castle town that looks like it was a victim of the apocalypse, the overworld is the exact same as it was when you left it, and it breaks the immersion completely. Yeah, sure, there are Poes you can fight for a side quest, but that doesn't make up for it, since you're going from a post-apocalyptic kingdom to a happy field with the same cheery music that hasn't changed in the slightest. Now, you're probably shaking your head at me right now going, oh come on, Scourge, it's an old game. Of course they're not going to be able to do something like that with such limited hardware. And to that I say, you're right. It probably couldn't be helped because of such limited hardware, and that's perfectly fine. Games were very limited after all, so you can't get too ambitious. But if that's the case, then why make it the way it is at all? If you want my personal opinion for what's the most important thing for a game to have, it's immersion. A video game should be able to capture your attention, and create a bridge between reality and fantasy, so you can fully enjoy the story the game is attempting to tell and insert yourself into its world. It doesn't have to be perfect for every game because every game is different, but for a game like Zelda, you should feel like an adventurer, and the most important thing for that is immersion, and the lack of it can make it very difficult for the player to care. Fortunately though, the rest of the areas pick up the slack. Most of them are places you've already been to, but they're either changed significantly to fit a more bleak tone, or it's the same place, but with a whole new section available. And it's a good way to motivate the player to explore and help out. In fact, despite already visiting these locations, they almost feel like completely new areas, which is one of the game's biggest strengths. Kokiri Forest hasn't changed aesthetically at all, nor do you go anywhere new, but the place is crawling with enemies, and the Kokiri are all locked inside for their own safety, so it feels like a different place, even though it isn't. Goron City is completely deserted, except for one who leads you into the crater of Death Mountain. Zora's Domain has been frozen over, which leads you into the Ice Cavern to obtain the blue fire and unfreeze the king. Kakariko Village is set on fire from the monster in the Shadow Temple. All of these things may not seem like much on the surface, but together it creates the grim tone of a world that's all out of whack because of one man's actions. It makes the backtracking a non-issue simply for that fact. Gameplay, however, is a different beast. Turning into an adult also bans the use of certain items, such as the slingshot and the boomerang. You also can't use the hookshot or the bow as a child, which is pretty dumb. I've been able to do both in games before and after this game was released. There's no reason why the inventory has to have such limitations. It doesn't add any challenge to the game. It's just a chore. The clothes and boots make sense at least, since the game tells you that they're for adults. But the items? No. It's a pointless limitation. Now, let's move on to the Forest Temple, which makes one thing immediately apparent, and that's the difficulty. It's one of the hardest dungeons in the game, and it's a good example of a difficulty spike done right. We were just eased into the game little by little as a child, but now that you're an adult, increased difficulty makes a lot of sense. It's almost like this temple is the game's way of telling me, now you better listen up, boy, and you listen up good. You better put your man pants on. You ain't a dang whippersnapper no more. So get out there and show him your stuff. As such, this temple is much more complex than anything else up to this point. The music is creepy, the puzzles are longer and more brain-taxing, and it pulls no punches with the enemies. I've frequently found myself getting lost in this place, especially on my first playthrough, and I'm willing to bet this was done intentionally, which, to be honest, just adds to the atmosphere of this temple. I love it, but it also has a negative side effect. While the temple's complexity can be seen as a nice change to fit the setting, it can also just as easily put some players off with what it throws at the player. For instance, the 4 Poe sisters, who serve as the dungeon's mini-bosses, 2 of which are incredibly annoying to get to. And even when you are able to reach them, fighting them is just a damn waiting game. You have to wait for them to attack so you can counterattack, keeping you on the defensive. Now, this is fine against humanoid enemies like Stalfos, since it builds up tension and makes them all the more satisfying to take out. But here, you can't even see them half the time, so you just end up targeting the air until they decide to stop hiding and attack you. Poes just suck in general. Then there's the layout itself. As I previously stated, it's very easy to get lost in this temple. And for the first-time player, some of the keys that are required to move forward are put in such out-of-the-way locations that finding them can very well be up to sheer dumb luck. Like this one right here at the entrance, just as an example. How in the hell are first-timers supposed to find this? It's even trolled me a couple times, and I'm a Zelda veteran. The item you get here is the bow, which is used very cleverly and is still one of the most popular items in the franchise. And for good reason. Topping all this off is one of the game's best bosses, Phantom Ganon. He hops across the paintings in the room, which is an awesome concept that is shown throughout the temple with the Poe sisters, but is brought to the forefront in this confrontation, and it pays off well. He's a very fun fight. It's just a shame he doesn't have more attacks, since all he really does is throw lightning at you when he's on his horse, and when he's off his horse, he throws a magic projectile at you that you can knock back at him. It turns the battle from a great test of timing and aim with your arrows into a tennis match, which Zelda is filled to the brim with, to be fair. Hello, Aghanim. But I can let that slide. What I can't let slide is the camera. Now that's to say, it isn't really the camera itself that's the problem here, but the guardrails present around the arena that get in the way and make it difficult to see what you're doing. Thankfully, it didn't give me too much trouble this time around, but I have noted times where it has before, so it's still something to be aware of. Next up, the Fire Temple. You'll have to forgive my lack of enthusiasm, but I really hate this temple. Let me list off the reasons why. There's an annoying red tint throughout the place which makes it hard to see things. The copious amounts of boulders that move around in this room, which the camera gives you a top-down perspective of so you can see them while turning corners, which is fair enough. However, this comes with a side effect. With this camera angle, you can see the boulders just fine, but you want to know what it doesn't let you see? The fucking doors! And because every room in this godforsaken place just has to be a maze, I find myself constantly going back and forth trying to find out where the hell to go, leading me to run into the boulders anyway as a result. And you may argue that's more of a me problem, and I'll admit it kind of is, but still, you should be able to at least have the camera snap back to behind Link if you so choose. Just make the boulders appear as icons on the map or something, cause this is just bad game design. And don't even get me started on this room! Oh god! Why would you design something like this? I can barely go anywhere without running into walls or obstacles. Just watch! See my point? Fuck this room. Now, to the game's credit, you're required to rescue multiple Gorons as you move through this temple, which is a great concept. It makes you feel like a real hero, which is something the game excels at, but to me, it's not as satisfying as it should be because of how terribly this dungeon is constructed in my eyes. Like, even the mini-bosses piss me off because they run away from you when you hookshot them, and it wastes my time. Get back here, you stupid bitch, and fight me like a man! I'm sorry if I sound overly petty right now, but this is genuinely what I think. I honestly have no idea why I don't see more people talk about this place. The only saving grace this temple has for me is the music, which is different depending on what version of the game you have. Oh yeah, I should probably get back into that, shouldn't I? Remember when I said the game went through a few updates after release? Well, this right here is the biggest representation of that. The first two versions of the game included Islamic chanting within the Fire Temple, which adds a lot to the atmosphere. But Nintendo made the call to update the game and remove it to make sure they didn't offend any Muslims, because apparently it's offensive to have music playing during those chants. Because of this, it was replaced with the same sound font heard in the Shadow Temple instead. But from what I've heard, within people who actually know about this, it actually had the opposite effect, with people preferring the old track, including people claiming to be Muslim. How ironic. But I'll let you draw your own conclusions on this. Take a listen. Other version differences include Ganondorf having green blood, some glitches being fixed including a couple game-breaking ones, and changing the Gerudo mark because of more Islamic symbolism. Geez, Nintendo was bold back then. But now you're probably wondering, well, what version of the game do I have? Well, to go on a tangent for a bit, there are three major versions of Ocarina of Time. Version 1, version 1.1, and version 1.2. That doesn't include Master Quest on the GameCube or the Virtual Console release, since they're both an edited version of version 1.2, and the 3DS version is a remake. So this only applies to those of you who have the N64 original release, which I think is the best way to experience this game anyway. If you check the back of the cartridge, you'll be able to see a small punched-in number right around here with a letter next to it. If there's no letter, you have version 1. If the letter is an A, you have version 1.1. And if the letter is a B, you have version 1.2. Looking at the back of my cartridge, you can see that I have version 1.1, so if you're wondering why my game is different with Ganondorf having red blood instead of green, well, that's why. The numbers are also 2 zeros in my case, which leads me to believe this was the first version 1.1 cartridge ever made, which really fascinates me. Anyway, I'm rambling, so let's get back to the Fire Temple. The item you get in the Fire Temple is the Megaton Hammer, which is used pretty well around this dungeon, but is pretty much useless everywhere else. Or so I thought. I learned later on it can actually be used as a substitute for bombs, opening up grottos and bombable walls. But the problem is, the game gives you no incentive that you can even do this, which leads the Megaton Hammer feeling like a wasted item slot in the grand scheme of things. The temple's boss is the subterranean lava dragon Volvagia, which is one of the only bosses in the entire series with actual build-up, since many of the Gorons mention him by name, which is a nice touch. But his fight is... This boss leaves me very conflicted, to be honest. On one hand, he has much better variety in his attacks than Phantom Ganon, but on the other, in order to damage this boss, you have to play a very boring game of whack-a-mole, which makes this boss's enjoyment very inconsistent and overall hurts it as a result. Which is a real shame, because this boss's design is fucking metal! Man, even today I think this looks good. I especially love the fire hairdo he's rocking. So cool. But now, ladies and gentlemen, here is the point of the video you have all been waiting for. Because we're about to move on to the good old Water Temple, and hoo boy! Where do I even start with this one? The Water Temple is beyond infamous among the fanbase. No one who's ever played a Zelda game in their life hasn't at least heard of this place. It is tedium incarnate. Having to use Zelda's Lullaby to raise and lower the water level, having to pause and switch the iron boots on and off constantly, the overall design of the temple, it's just dreadful. Even the puzzles are tedious. They aren't hard by any means, but they just take forever and aren't very fun to go through. Not to mention there are so many corridors, and since they all look the same, it can be hard to keep track where you haven't been, leading you to miss one or two keys somewhere down the line, which, by the way, is a terrible thing to do in this place. The reason being that it takes so much work just to get back to it if you end up changing the water level before realizing it's there, and when it happens, you feel like an idiot. This place does that to you a lot. Trust me, I speak from experience. This temple also requires liberal use of the hook shot, which is upgraded to the long shot halfway through, and it also brings to light a problem with the aiming. It's very stiff and sensitive, so I often end up having to move the cursor back and forth trying to get it to land the way I want it to. It's a small problem that's present from when you become an adult since you get the hookshot before the Forest Temple, but it builds up over the course of the game and is most likely to be brought to your attention through this temple, because of how often it's needed to get around. Another thing worthy of note, Jesus, we're still going, is that this is the temple where I find myself fighting the camera the most due to the insanely small place within most of these corridors. I don't think I should be seeing this. This makes combat unnecessarily painful, especially underwater. And considering it always happens when I'm trapped in a cramped space, it feels much longer than I'm comfortable with. And the hitboxes on these clams can just go fuck themselves. Look at this. I should be hitting it with my hookshot, but it just keeps bouncing off of it even when its mouth is open, and it pisses me off. This is not okay, guys. And then we get to Dark Link, the mini-boss of the Water Temple. I love the concept, and it has the framework of a good boss fight considering it's one of the most popular fights in the series, but its execution falls short in several areas. Most people don't really touch upon this, but this boss embodies my earlier point about the combat feeling frustrating at times due to the hitbox on Link's sword. Although, in this case, it's probably more so the hurt box on Dark Link. You'd think trying to have a sword duel like the nature of this boss suggests would be a good idea, but it really isn't. So the idea here is that Dark Link is your reflection, and as such, he has all the same tricks as you, and tries to copy all of your sword swings, and as such, you need to find a strategy around that, and find a way around his defenses, which are also the same as yours. He can take just as many hits as you can. For example, if you're doing a 3-heart run, he'll also have 3 hearts worth of health. But my attacks never seem to hit the guy, when I could swear that they did. As such, he's able to phase through my sword like it's nothing, which leaves me open and lets him counter me. It's very unfair. Like, see for yourself. Right here. Does this look like that it missed to you? Because I certainly don't. Now, I'm not saying that this is impossible. It's definitely possible to beat him with the sword. I've done it before, but the problem is it's just not worth the trouble. What's even worse is that pulling out Din's fire makes this guy a total joke. And I think the game's developers knew this, since they give you magic drops at the entrance. It gives me the impression that this could have been fixed, but wasn't for whatever reason. And to top all of this off, we have the boss Morpha, which can either be a complete pushover or teeth-grindingly frustrating depending on your skill level. I'll explain the latter first. His core is small and moves around a lot, so it can be difficult to hit. And he does a lot of damage if he's able to grab you, which can be from pretty much anywhere because he has a lot of range unless you stay in the corner. Not to mention there isn't really a lot of room to move around since the entire pool in the middle is the boss. So if you get knocked into that water, you are quite literally a sitting duck. But on the other hand, once you get his core, you can literally just trap him in the corner after hookshotting him and be done with the fight in like 10 seconds. I, however, do not have the skill to do this, so props to those of you who can, because this boss is a cakewalk to you if that's the case. Either way, though, Morpha overall is just an unsatisfying boss, and is the icing on the cake of this horrible dungeon. With all that being said, I hold no shame in admitting that I hate the Fire Temple more due to bad memories, but I will agree that thinking objectively, this dungeon is as terrible as its reputation. I just don't have much of a problem with it personally. Hear me out. Despite all of the problems I just listed and all of the complaining that I've done, I actually kind of enjoy the Water Temple and look forward to playing through it. It's hard to explain, but I find it soothing in a way. Yeah, it's bad, I'm not gonna deny that, but I have a very high tolerance for tedium, so it doesn't really bother me. This place has sort of a calm and relaxing feel to it, keeping me from really getting mad the same way the Fire Temple does. Call it Stockholm Syndrome if you want, but I kinda like the Water Temple. I will say it again though, objectively, this is by far the worst dungeon in the game and one of the worst dungeons in the franchise. But just because I don't hate it doesn't mean you won't either. Now before I move on to the Shadow Temple, I'd like to take a moment to go over some of the mini dungeons, games, and side quests. Both the child and adult portions sports a shooting gallery, using the slingshot and the bow respectively. They're nothing special to be honest though, it's all just simple memorization on how the targets move. You're most likely going to fail it a few times due to the stiff aiming controls in first person, and then after a few more tries just get it like it's nothing. Then it's no problem getting the reward, which is just more ammo for your slingshot and bow. Thankfully, the Gerudo shooting minigame is much better. You're moving on horseback this time, so this minigame is much more skill-based, and even gets you 2 prizes for beating it instead of just 1. The Bomb Chew minigame is also kind of memorization-based, but not as severe since it requires good timing and angling, and I find it more enjoyable because of that. The Kuko minigame at the Lanlan Ranch requires you to find 3 specific Kukos in a bunch, so pay attention to exactly which way Talon throws them, otherwise you better pray you get them by winging it. It can be annoying otherwise if you don't find them by pure dumb luck like I did. You get a bottle for it though, so it's well worth it for sure. And you get a nice bit of humorous dialogue about Link marrying Malon, which is pretty adorable. The chess minigame in Castletown can only be accessed at night, which is completely luck-based unless you use the Lens of Truth to look into the chest and cheese the game. Yay, cheating! Best part is, these minigames aren't really out of the way either. They're easy to find just from exploring the world normally. And speaking of which, that was what I was doing during a good chunk of this playthrough. Just wandering around, smelling the roses, and doing a few side quests when I happened to find them. The biggest ones just consist of running all over the place and delivering or trading items to people, only to get yet another useless item to trade. Rinse and repeat until eventually you get something a little less useless. Looking at you, Mask of Truth. The other trading quest, while very long, nets you the Big Goron sword as an adult. The sword takes both hands to use, so you can't use your shield while you have it out, but it's even stronger than the Master Sword. For some reason. Okay then. Some of the things that must be traded are on a timer though, so you can't just dilly-dally like with the other side quests. There are so many side quests and minigames to do, but if I went over them all in depth, we'd be here all day. So let's just move on to the mini dungeons. There are 3 places that I'd classify as mini dungeons, the most obvious of which being the Ice Cavern, so I'll cover that one first. The Ice Cavern comes right before the Water Temple. It's where you get the Iron Boots, and normally I can't stand ice dungeons, since ice physics causes a lot of unfair damage and it's just really annoying to have to deal with, but I'm cool with this one. It's short and sweet and very pretty for Nintendo 64 standards. I especially like the red ice that can only be melted with blue fire. It's a neat idea and is even used in Zora's Domain since the shop and the damn king are both frozen in this red ice. Just a word of advice, make sure you have at least 2 bottles or more. Otherwise, you're going to be backtracking a lot just to get more blue fire. The only problems I have with the Ice Cavern itself are the block puzzle, which is not only annoying, but is also where I find myself climbing on the block the most when I could swear I just pushed it. Yeah, I know, this is the minorest of minor shit that I'm complaining about, and I shouldn't even be bringing it up, but I couldn't help but notice it the most here. Also, the ice keys. Fuck the ice keys. God, I can't even move, and there's a good chance that they can just combo me indefinitely until I die. Thankfully, it wasn't that bad this time around, but I remember having an abysmal time with them in my first playthrough, and I can't stand them because of it, so I thought it was still worth mentioning. Ending with a fight against a giant white wolfos, which is not really hard at all. Overall, the Ice Cavern is a good time. Just don't get used to me saying that about ice dungeons. Next is the bottom of the well, which may seem confusing because of the invisible holes everywhere, but is actually pretty easy if you know what to do. I really like how this place is inherently creepy and takes advantage of your skills as a child, and gets tougher with the enemies. Too bad I couldn't get footage of most of this since I kinda cheated on this one. See, during this playthrough I used quite a few glitches to my advantage for fun, including the Navi dive to get into the bottom of the well much earlier than you're supposed to. So I ended up having the Lens of Truth before Dodongo's Cavern. I also took advantage of the infinite sword glitch a lot in the Forest Temple, which is hard to get the hang of, but is really fun to abuse once you do. Out of all the mini dungeons in the game, the bottom of the well is the only one with an actual original boss. And it's probably the creepiest thing in the whole game. What with the zombie-like appearance, blood patches, and the way you have to let it grab you to get it to appear. It even aims for your head when it attacks, like it's trying to decapitate you. Ugh. Definitely stands out among other bosses in the game, for better or for worse. And finally we have the Gerudo's Training Grounds, which is definitely the most complicated one of the lot. I don't even know if this is even considered a mini dungeon, but you get keys and solve puzzles, so fuck you, I say it counts. This is kind of like a gauntlet where you use all the gadgets you've gotten throughout the game to move forward and collect keys to open this maze of locked doors. What I love about this place is just how many items are needed to get through it, and the puzzles are satisfying to boot. I really wish more places in Zelda were like this so it could get more use out of the lesser items besides the dungeon you get it in. Your prize for completing it all is the ice arrows, which do absolutely nothing for you as far as I'm aware. There isn't one point in the entire game that I believe requires them. If I'm wrong and there is, please feel free to correct me in the comments below. By all means, I want to know where I can find a use for these things. At least the fire arrows help you with lighting torches from a distance, which you get by shooting the sun after the water temple. I'm not kidding, that's actually what you need to do. I don't get it either. One more thing I want to say about the Gerudo Training Grounds, though, is that it's the only mini-dungeon that's completely optional, but I wouldn't recommend attempting it until after the Spirit Temple, since the silver gauntlets are needed for one of the puzzles, which is an item you don't get until that point. Alright, here we go with the Shadow Temple. This dungeon is similar to the bottom of the well, but like 1,000 times more disturbing. We got invisible pits and walls, undead enemies, creepy music, torture devices, and disembodied voices that tell riddles that have to do with the puzzles in the dungeon, or just reveal some fucked up parts about Zelda's lore. Here's an example of the latter. Shadow Temple. Here is gathered Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred. Well, that's certainly a tone setter. I swear, this temple is something out of a horror movie, not a Zelda game. It feels like I'm trespassing in the underworld, and the fact that the Shadow Temple is heavily implied to be a torture prison only makes that more apparent. I mean, they got it all here. Stakes with splatters of blood on the floor, prison cells, guillotines, whatever the hell this thing is. And let's not forget this boat part. You can't tell me that this isn't a reference to a boat crossing the River of Styx. Jesus, Nintendo, you've got balls. All this symbolism is too much, and I love it. But enough gushing about the Shadow Temple's awesome atmosphere. Onto the dungeon itself, and it's much more linear this time around. It sometimes feels more like a set of trials than a temple, as there's minimal backtracking to be found here, and the puzzles are well thought out because of how otherworldly this place feels. The mini-boss is also unusually early on in the dungeon, which also adds to the atmosphere in my opinion. But speaking of the mini-boss, that's the only thing that disappoints me about the Shadow Temple. It's just another dead hand. It's pretty lazy, and if you ask me, I always thought this is where you should have encountered Dark Link. The Shadow Temple, not the Water Temple, since Dark Link might as well be Link's shadow, see the correlation there? And it would fit the tone of the temple beautifully. Such a missed opportunity. Nevertheless, after Dead Hand is, well, dead, you get the Hover Boots, which thankfully are much better than the Iron Boots. Unlike in the Water Temple, you can just keep these on for the rest of the dungeon. I mean, yeah, there are a couple rooms where it might be better to take them off, like this room and this room. But in comparison to the Water Temple, just a couple rooms are nothing. They help a lot with platforming to be sure, and it adds to the temple's symbolism since the temple literally refers them to as the sacred feet. I mean, you're literally walking on air when you use them, so it makes sense, I guess. But, and here it comes, as long as you have them on, you'll be sliding all over the place like you're on constant ice physics. It's got me falling off cliffs a few times, but fortunately those are few and far between when you get used to them. So you can just leave them on for the rest of the game if you really want to. Since when this happens, they'll more often endanger you just to save you again afterwards. Yeah, it's weird. And finally, we have the best boss in the game, Bongo Bongo. Since the item obtained in this dungeon is an upgrade on Link himself instead of an item being used with the C buttons, this boss has much more creative freedom than the others before it, and it pays off as a result. You stun his hands with the bow, which is easier said than done due to the bouncing of the battlefield. Then move on to his head. But wait, you can't see his head. So you have to use the lens of truth in order to see it, but you have to do it quickly or he rams into you. I used to have a lot of trouble on this boss as a kid, and that's a sign of what it does right. It's just a great fight that does nothing but add to the atmosphere and lore of the game, topping off one of the best dungeons in the series. It's that good. Before we move on to the Spirit Temple, we gotta go through Gerudo Desert and Gerudo Fortress. And let me just say, Gerudo Valley has one of the best tracks in the game. It's a fan favorite, and for good reason. Yeah, perhaps I should finally get into the music as a whole. It's great. Being the first 3D game in the series and much more musical freedom as a result, I can only imagine how tempting it must have been to fill the game with remasters of older classics. But instead, it's mostly original. It's filled with some of the most iconic music in Zelda history and in some ways, gaming as a whole. And it restrains itself well for the most part, so the more catchy tunes aren't playing for the whole game. I say for the most part, cause I can only listen to Zelda's Lullaby so many times before getting tired of it. Nevertheless, I can see why this soundtrack is so loved by fans. My favorites of which being Zora's Domain, Saria's Song, Gerudo Valley, the battle theme, Dinosaur Fight, all of the adult dungeon themes, Ganondorf's theme, and the boss theme. Gerudo Fortress starts an infamous trend that nobody wants to see in a Zelda game, and that's crappy stealth sections. Every 3D game has them, and it sucks. First of all, the corridors are very narrow like in the Water Temple, so you can't see anything until it's too late. As a result, this section ends up becoming a game of trial and error until you memorize which way to go and where all the guards are, some of which are very dickishly placed, and the crates that the game gives you to hide behind don't help at all. I found that the best way of dealing with all of this is just to hang outside the guard's range of sight and just shoot them with the bow. It's much easier than sneaking around in vain, that's for sure. Eventually, you'll encounter one of 4 carpenters locked in a cage, and thus begins a fight with the guard. Now, why you can fight these guards, but have to sneak past these guards, I will never understand. You have all your weapons with you. It's not like your stuff is taken away from you like in other games when you get caught. If I can fight these guards, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to fight all of them. You can't have your cake and eat it too, game. Fighting the Gerudo isn't too difficult. It can actually be pretty fun. Just be careful of their stupid spin attack. It has a big hitbox, you can't always block it, and if you get hit by it, you're sent back to prison as if you were caught by the other guards. Which happened to me a lot this time around, and it pissed me off. Thankfully though, when all 4 carpenters are saved, a guard shows up and gives you a membership slip so you can freely come and go without needing to sneak around anymore. It also allows you to partake in their awesome minigames, which is a nice bonus. After using the Lens of Truth to follow a ghost through a desert maze that is in no way similar to the Lost Woods, we arrive at the Spirit Temple. Upon entering, you'll soon find out that you're too fat to go any further, so you learn via Sheik that you have to come back as a child. Time travel is the best diet, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it here first. All jokes aside though, this is without a shadow of a doubt the best dungeon in the game. It actually takes advantage of both adult and child Link. The child portion takes advantage of all of child Link's skills, like Deku Sticks and the Boomerang. It combines puzzles from the child dungeons with the enemies of the adult dungeons. And while this block puzzle here can take a while, they're all still very enjoyable. The child portion ends with a mini-boss fight against the biggest and baddest enemy in the game, the Iron Knuckle. They hit hard, they can take quite the beating, and they get even faster after you do enough damage to them, and fuck me, these guys hit hard! Look at how much damage this guy does to me! Shit, man! I need to cast Nehru's Love before I can fight these things comfortably, since it really helps lessen the damage. But we finally defeat it, get the silver gauntlets, and encounter Kapora Gabora? God damn it, it's almost the end of the game and you're still popping up as a child annoying the shit out of me! Anyway, after getting the silver gauntlets, you're able to access the adult portion of the Spirit Temple, which is the part where the dungeon really steps it up and feels even more clever and satisfying to go through than before. I've actually gotten stumped a couple times at this part, which in this case is what I find to be a good thing. However, the dungeon's puzzles in this part, while positive overall, are also inconsistent. One or two rooms feel like they underestimate your abilities a little too much, such as in this room that you can literally just skip by using the long shot. But then there are rooms like this one right here that can fuck right off! Mostly because of these assholes, the Anubis. The rooms that have these stupid things I'm not a fan of at all. Nothing hurts them at all but fire, they need to be killed to proceed, and there are a lot of bottomless pits in their rooms, which are all very irritating. This puzzle here also seems poorly implemented, since whether or not you get in the door in time is dictated by whether or not the Armos follow you and land on the switch long enough for you to reach the door. But the silver gauntlets aren't the only item you get in this place. Oh no. After another Iron Knuckle fight, you get the Mirror Shield, which is quite possibly the best upgrade ever. Redirecting beams of light to solve puzzles is an amazing concept, and it's executed well. So well, in fact, that I wish there were more puzzles like these in the game. After yet another Iron Knuckle fight, which turns out to be a brainwashed Nibiru, we come to the boss of the Spirit Temple, the Sorceress Sisters Twinrova. Now this is a good boss fight, and uses the Mirror Shield very effectively since it lets you use their magic against them to do damage. But after a few hits, they decide to step things up a notch, and they get all Dragon Ball Z in this bitch and fuse into one being. And let me just say, it's terrifying for all the wrong reasons. Well, I guess now is as good a time as any to go over this. One obvious thing about this game that hasn't aged well, the graphics. Which is fine for the most part. Graphics do very little to influence my opinion on a game, but it becomes glaring with these women with big lips like they're taking beauty tips from Jinx, pointy N64 tits that make my eyes hurt just looking at them, and don't even get me started on the Great Fairy's ear-piercing... that... Twinrova's fused form especially makes me cringe. N64 woman model aside, I enjoy this fight a lot. Twinrova's magic look incredibly powerful as it lights up the entire room for what element is being used, and they use it in different orders as you whittle them down to try and throw you off. But that's really all there is to it, cause they don't have any other attacks besides one magic attack of each element. And don't get me wrong, they look amazing, especially for the time, putting magic attacks from past games and even future ones in my opinion to shame to this very day. The devs should be proud of it, but that's just it. These two desperately need more attacks. Yeah, I know, I've said this a few times already, but since this is the boss of the last temple of the game before the final area, they should have more to throw at you. Furthermore, these aren't mindless creatures you're fighting anymore either. They're actual people, and elderly people at that, so take advantage of that coveted elderly wisdom. They're sorceresses with years of life experience under their belts, so there's no way they haven't learned other spells or come across opponents that try to use their magic against them. So why don't they have strategies against that? combine their magic so it's too much for the shield to reflect, or use it to destroy the battlefield. There are so many possibilities for magic to be used, and since this is the second to last boss, having only one attack just doesn't cut it. I also think they should have used attacks that make you use the silver gauntlets, since it's also an item you get here because they're kind of forgotten about for no reason after you get the mirror shield. Like, have them use magic to throw a giant boulder that would need to be picked up and thrown back at them. Just something. I'm not saying this is a bad boss by any means, it's actually one of the better ones, but it's one of my pet peeves when a boss doesn't mix it up and attack you the same way over and over again. Don't mistake this for negativity. I liked what was there. I just wanted more, that's all. And in the long run, this does nothing to keep the Spirit Temple from being the best dungeon in the game, and one of the best Zelda dungeons, period. It's a real shame there aren't more dungeons in the series like this one. Alright, here we go. After beating all those dungeons and saving all the sages, we can finally take the fight to Ganondorf at Ganon's castle. While not perfect, this is certainly a fitting place to end the game on. Before you can even progress, you must go through 6 rooms symbolizing all the dungeons to dispel the barrier blocking your path. Though we of the Zelda fanbase like to call these the trials. I'll get the bad one out of the way first. The Shadow Trial is easily the worst of them in my opinion. First of all, you need the fire arrows to get anywhere here, which, like I said earlier, the game is pretty elusive about besides a bit of a vague cutscene. Not to mention there are a lot of bottomless pits, more so than all the other trials combined, so it's the easiest to fall off of and drain your life and magic as a result. And this like doesn't help either. What's even worse though is that it's best to do this one first, since out of nowhere you get the golden gauntlets, which is an upgrade to the silver gauntlets. You can't complete the fire trial or the spirit trial without them, and you can't even access the light trial without them. And in addition to this, it's hid behind a switch that you may or may not even see. It brings back bad memories. I'm not a big fan of the fire trial either, although I admittedly do like how you use the golden gauntlets to lift a giant granite pillar, chuck it across the room, and then use it as a stepping stone to grab the last silver rupee. It's pretty satisfying. The forest and water trials have nice references that I appreciate very much. You see, during the development of the game, there was actually a wind and ice temple planned, but they were both scrapped for whatever reason, so these two trials feel like they're doing their best to keep their legacy alive. Even though the Ice Cavern became a mini-dungeon, but shut up, I'm trying to make a point here. The Forest Trial is a bit awkward though. The Spirit Trial is my favorite of them, surprise surprise, since you use Bomb Chews and the Mirror Shield to your advantage. But it also made me aware of something. This game's physics engine is whack at times. I know I can't be too critical about that kind of stuff considering the game's age, but oh come on, just look at some of this. This is not something I should be able to do. This is broken design to be sure, but is it fun? Oh hell yeah. The Light Trial just confuses the hell out of me. It's the longest one since it has 3 rooms in it when all the others only have 1 or 2. The first room is almost identical to the first room in the Forest Trial, except for using the Lens of Truth to see the enemies. And a bit off topic for a sec, but these ice chests are just plain rude. You only encounter them in the Water Trial, this trial, the Gerudo Training Grounds, and the Ice Cavern, but you open a chest expecting something good and you just get blasted with ice instead. Well, fuck you too, game. Sorry, I just really wanted to mention that. The second room requires Zelda's Lullaby, which doesn't make much sense in Ganon's Tower of all places, but that's just me being an asshole, so pay me no mind. The third room, however, is just poorly designed. There's no room in here at all, there are 2 boulders to watch out for while collecting silver rupees, and there's a time limit for some fucking reason. Look, the fire trial had a time limit too, sort of, to be fair, but it made sense since you were sinking into lava. You had to be fast so you don't get burned and have to start the room over again. Here, though, it's just boulders going round and round to beat your ass. There's no reason why this has to be put on a timer whatsoever. But after the trials are complete, this is where the real fun begins. The rest of the castle serves as a gauntlet of the toughest enemies the game has to offer while you climb the tower. No backtracking, no puzzles, no nothing. Just fighting your way to the top with your sword and your wits. And the music gets louder and louder as you make your way up. Yes, this is a very minor detail, but I just love this. Not only does it build up tension for the final confrontation with Ganondorf, but it shows that the music actually has a source. And that source is Ganondorf himself. He's playing his own theme on the organ while waiting for Link. It's just so symbolic, badass, and I love this detail so much! And when you finally do reach him, you play another game of death tennis. But unlike his Phantom, he has more attacks to threaten you with. Most notably this ground pound that can destroy parts of the battlefield and can cause you to fall down to the lower level. This means that you're able to restock with arrows, magic, and hearts, but it also means it can give him an opening to strike you again when you come back up. And I enjoy this fight a lot because of that. Now, if that were it, I'd be singing a completely different tune here, but that's not all there is to it. We're just getting started. After his defeat, Ganondorf decides to go, "Fuck it, I'm dropping the whole castle on your asses," forcing you to have to escape a crumbling castle in a limited amount of time. Now, you'd think this would add lots of suspense, but sadly, that isn't the case. This section drags its ass across the floor and into a ditch. This is basically another escort mission, but you're escorting Zelda this time. And while it's good that she can't die much like Ruto, but unlike Ruto, you can't pick her up so she goes your speed. All of the doorways are barred, so you have to wait for Zelda to catch up to you so she can open them up. At one point, you're also trapped and forced to fight 2 Stalfos at once with the time limit still ticking down. And they come back if you don't kill the other one fast enough. It isn't terrible by any means, but it serves to do nothing but detract from the tension of the finale instead of add to it. This is the only part of the tower collapse that does increase the tension, so I'm grateful for that at least. And while you could argue that its purpose is to show Zelda being useful, which is nice, don't get me wrong, but I find that a pretty weak reason if you ask me. At the very least, it adds some great scenery to the final battle with Ganon, which is incredibly iconic and intimidating. This is how you make a final boss, guys. Ganon's big, he hits hard, the music is climactic, while at the same time kinda creepy, and the atmosphere is tantalizing. Seriously, he does 2 hearts of damage, with the defense buff you can get outside the castle. And a nice touch is the fact that Zelda screams in terror every time you get hit. And if that weren't enough, he knocks your sword away at the start of the battle, forcing you to fight him without it for the first half. Now, if you went out of your way to get the big Goron sword, this means absolutely nothing to you. But if not, you'll have to get creative about how you damage him. It's fun, but when you weaken him enough, you have the opportunity to get your sword back. I have no idea why Zelda can't just pick it up and toss it to you, but whatever. Now, I would complain once again about the variety of attacks, but I can actually justify this by saying the context of this battle is that Ganon is rampaging and he can't control himself. So I won't go into it much here, but I do wish he at least had a shockwave or something, so I can't just keep doing this over and over again. But think of it how you will. This argument has merits for both sides. After you beat on his tail enough, you stab him in one of the greatest finishers ever. Like, seriously, this shit wouldn't be too out of place in Mortal Kombat. It even has the blood for it.
Finish him. Link wins. Fatality.
After Ganon is beat, you know how it goes. Zelda seals Ganondorf away and sends Link back in time, thus concluding the game. Ocarina of Time is considered by many as an absolute masterpiece. You aren't likely to find many other games that are quite as beloved as this one, and it's been discussed so much at this point that there was really nothing else I could possibly add. All I really did was analyze the game and tell you all about it in depth, and anyone can do that. But I, for one, have had an interesting relationship with this game. I was on and off this game constantly as a kid, for better or for worse. I was always getting stuck in the overworld, the dungeons, one of the bosses, and finally the Gerudo Fortress. And after all of that, I was bitter towards this game and its popularity for a while, like many others. I believed it was overrated, and the fanbase's constant praise for it ruined my own experiences of playing it for a long time. And when I finally did bring myself to beat the game and watch the credits, it had been over a decade since I first started. But as the ages went by and I played through the game again for this review, I started to appreciate it for what it really is, and now I enjoy it a lot. Furthermore, the more I play it, the stronger that appreciation grows. It really feels like this game has a sort of charm to it, and it pays off. Is it as mind-blowing as the diehard fans say it is? Hell no. There are still crippling flaws that really bog the game down, especially with the empty overworld and during a few of the dungeons. The game holds your hand too much during the child portion of the story, and its presentation is still rough around the edges. I'm under the belief that nothing is perfect, and frankly, not even the greatest game in the world could live up to the impossible standards that the fans hype this one up to be. But the real question is Is it still fun today, even after 20 years? Absolutely. This is where 3D Zelda started, and it was a paragon of its kind, at a time where 3D games were still new, and if not done correctly, could equal the death of the entire franchise in question. Ocarina of Time, however, blew the door wide open for amazing action-adventure games that came afterwards, including other Zelda games, and the fact that people are still playing it, even to this day, is incredible. It was made with a certain amount of love and care that few early 3D games can hope to rival, and I think it shows. It's a game that's grown on me exponentially over the years, and even though the other games that came afterwards could be considered better in many ways, they still have this game to thank at least partly for their success. Ocarina of Time haters, please listen to me when I say this, as one of your own, who was once riding on the Ocarina hate train along with you. Give this game a second chance. Don't judge it based on the fan base. It's not my favorite game in the series by a long shot, and it doesn't have to be yours either. I know I personally enjoy other Zelda games much more than Ocarina of Time, but does it really deserve all of this petty spite? I personally don't believe it does, if only because we may not have even gotten the Zelda games that came afterwards if this game wasn't as successful as it was. I respect what this game accomplished, and I think everyone else should too. If you're looking to get into the Legend of Zelda series, this is one of the best places to start. Its graphics may not have aged too well, but its gameplay is what I would call truly timeless. Released in the US on November 23rd, the new game, codenamed Zelda 64 at the time, was first shown off at Space World 1996, and it was which is very ambitious for the time. Was, not is. God damn it. And tells Link about the sacred realm. Realm. Zelda, hurry, we go to the sacred realm. So to combat this, Link must collect the other two spiritual stones while she guards the temple. She also explains that... So to combat this, Link must collect the other two spiritual stones while she guards the Ocarina of... Fuck! Link wakes up in the Sacred Realm suddenly all grown up and meets Rauru, a Soige. Is that even a fucking word? Sure, somebody's made it up. Unfortunately, story progression just kind of halts again after the second sage. The only thing worth mentioning are the sages, who are revealed to be Link's childhood friend Saria, Darunia, Ruto, Impa, and a Gerudian... I'm just creating a whole new slew of words today. But thankfully, there are quite a few hidden places around Kokiri Vorage. The fuck? However, you gotta truck through Hyrule Castle first. Field. Stupid phone! What do you want? Anyway, I'm rambling, so let's get back to the Fire Temple. They aren't hard by any means, but they just take forever. And they're not very fun to travel through. What? Really? It's like everything in the fucking world wants to interrupt me when doing this. Thanks, random plane. Fuck you too. Ugh. They aren't hard by any means, but they just take forever. It's just dreadful. Wait. I just went back. Shit. Yeah, damn kids, get off my lawn. Seriously, there are a lot of kids in this complex. A lot of loud kids. It's a small problem that's present from when you become an adult, since you get... Oh my god. Stupid kids. Why are you even outside? There's just dirty snow and mud. Like, seriously, why are you playing out here right now? Ugh. And considering it always happens when I'm underwater. Fuck! Can I do this line, please? Oliver, are you serious? Fuck. The world just does not want me to complete this video, does it? Ugh. Okay, listen, buddy, I love you, but I'm in the middle of something. Need you to get off. Okay. You are as stubborn as a fucking mule. I can't have you in here, buddy. Your shenanigans will pick up on the mic. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop being difficult, you crazy cat. I'm gonna run out of time. Mother! Oliver, come on, buddy. I need you to stop. Son of a... What did I do to deserve this? The Kuka minigame at the Long of Ranch... The Long of Ranch? What? What the fuck am I saying? Like, I got this for Christmas one year, and a couple of years later, when I find out about these version differences, I checked the back of my cartridge to see I already have one of the earlier versions. It's kind of funny how things work like that, huh? I also attempted to drop a bomb in the Shadow Temple boss room to skip the Bongo Bongo cutscene, but I couldn't get that one to work. Meh. This puzzle here also seems poorly implemented, since whether or not you get in the door in time dictates whether the... Wait, dictates? What? That makes no sense. Is dictated. There. This puzzle here also seems poorly implemented, since whether or not you get in the door... Get in the door in time. So take advantage of that coveted elderly wisdom. Oh god, that's a tongue twister. At one point, you also get trapped and are forced to fight two Stolfos at once with the time limit still kicking down. Ticking. But also on... Shit. I started recording this so I can stop that. Recording this so... I could re-record that line so I don't say also. And I fucked it up! Yay, more editing for me. But unlike Ruto, you can't pick her up when she goes your speed. Fuck. When? Oh my god. And after that, I was bitter towards this game and its popularity. Fucking phone! At a time where 3D games were still new, and if not done correctly, could equal the... Ugh. God, this sentence is a mouthful.